Okay, so this one's about the nature of open sovereignty. Now, the reason I'm talking about this now is because of irrefutable evidence I've gathered recently that this concept that I've been gestating for probably decades at this point is feasible. Conceptually, I could see that it was possible, and I've been, patiently refuting that. And it's obviously taken many, many forms, and many of the assumptions I've made along the way have been rendered invalid. I've been re-hypothesizing and re-hypothesizing. However, I've now come to realize that it is actually feasible. So I feel it's timely to share it. So open sovereignty. So the context for this discussion is around an open sovereignty platform. So if you imagine concepts like open banking, open finance, and we're seeing a lot of platforms coming through the innovation ecosystem now that are seeking to open up markets by creating platforms that others can build upon and inherit the DNA of the stack, or inherit the rules of the organization. A blockchain network is a classic example of this. A blockchain network is kind of like an open economy. And so the context of open sovereignty is a scenario within which there is a platform that provides open sovereignty for anyone that builds upon that platform. So some of you know I've been working on a venture called Powerhouse since 2016. It is a translation project of WordPress into architecture that will enable it to be bolt onto and be powered by a blockchain. As a use case for the feasibility of decentralizing any monolithic software platform currently under centralized authority, like a company or some kind of organization. Choosing WordPress because it's obviously open source, and then validating it by utilizing that platform to deliver product market fit for a handful of products for an alpha tester, which we've done. That's all been done. And we've transcended every obstacle preventing the blueprint that we've developed from solving a real problem for a real client in the real world. That version of it's not commercially viable. It won't scale. The next phase of that project is to bolt it onto a native blockchain. And so in that context, what you have is a scenario within which we've taken something that has been designed to be under the stewardship of a centralized authority, WordPress, but that's been developed in the spirit of community, cooperation, and collaboration. So that's what I love about WordPress. And the beautiful thing about WordPress, its hidden genius, is that its architecture has been designed to infinitely scale. But for all of the fragmentation that happens on the marketplace, it can be perpetually consolidated. So if you remove all the constraints in the back end preventing it from scaling effectively, the front end, the inherent architecture will infinitely fragment, and that fragmentation will perpetually consolidate itself. And each component, so it can clone itself wholly as well as contain its clones. So there can be a singularity within which a clone of itself is contained within that container. That singularity can see all of the clones within itself, evolving and adapting to their unique environment in a unique way, but all deriving from the same DNA. And it will just continue to do this in a way where each individual component, each individual clone, can have its own identity, its own rules, its own laws, its own constitution, its own members, who are all oblivious to the fact that there is a container that can see all of them, that is containing and consolidating all of them, that has a set of universal, ubiquitous rules that are permeating each individual component, each individual clone, in the same way that the universe does it. So you have the perfect blueprint for the consolidation of sovereignty. So each individual clone is sovereign and free to set their own rules, have their own members. Their own members don't interact with the brand of the unified whole. In most cases, they'll be oblivious that it even exists. And so you have a blueprint for sovereignty that is actually contained within a universal framework that has its own laws that are inherent within the clone of within each clone. This is the hidden genius of WordPress. So throughout my journey, lots of people have thought I'm crazy trying to scale WordPress, of course. So many better technologies, and when I've invited, normal human beings to help me with this project, most of them turned it down, said, you're crazy, it can't be done. And I get it. However, I can see something they can't. And I was fortunate enough to have one individual back himself to take on this project, and we chipped away at it for many years against the advisement of many, many people. However, it brought us to an architecture that we knew that would enable the back end to perpetually and infinitely scale. And we developed a blueprint and a way to transition any form of centralized monolithic software to be able to take on these characteristics. And so here we have a scenario within which, so what I call that inherent DNA, is an open sovereignty platform. So open sovereignty meaning that, let's say you're the owners of Facebook. You can take Facebook and then have absolutely no change in the front end. So you could seamlessly, and without even letting the users know, without them even knowing, you could translate it onto an open sovereignty platform. And then overnight, each individual user would be wholly sovereign as an immutable identity, and contained within that identity are your particular behaviors, your biases, and your attention, your potential attention is contained within that immutable digital agent, and that is an immutable asset under your stewardship that must be permissioned in order for it to be commercialized. So zero change in the front end other than a radical shift in power from centralization to decentralization. Understanding that on an open sovereignty platform, you can then delegate your authority. But rather than standing beneath a centralized authority, the centralized authority stands beneath the sovereignty of the individual. So a massive radical paradigm shift in power, mass decentralization of power. But if you're sovereign if you're wholly sovereign, you are free to then distribute that authority. And so you may want to distribute it back to Facebook in that scenario. You might say, oh, okay, this is my asset now. I realize that your business model has been monetizing this asset in a centralized way and benefiting from it now. But I want you to continue monetizing it, but I want 10% of the spoils. I want 10% of everything you make, so that my behavior, my attention as an asset, the way I deploy it, the way it's being monetized is a wealth generating asset for myself, is my legacy. And I'm appreciating you for consolidating and centralizing the expertise, skills, and resources required for my asset to realize its value. That's what I am appreciating you for. So in this scenario, I'm thankful for the centralization and the consolidation of the fragmentation of expertise and skills. You see? Understanding that there's a symbiotic relationship between the ability to centralize and consolidate fragmentation, to create systems, to capitalize on dormant wealth, and then, but I am the custodian of that. It's my asset, and therefore it feels fair to me that I receive 10% of the spoils. And here you have a symbiotic relationship between centralization and decentralization. So you see, in this scenario, when you have an open sovereignty platform, just this one fulcrum, this one point, it's like the tipping point of everything. You don't have to change anything. You don't have to fight anything. You don't have to, blame governments and blame corporations for all of your woes. You just need to flick a switch, allow that shift in power to take place, and then you begin a symbiotic relationship between unity and separation, or centralization and decentralization, symbiotic, in harmony. And that such is nature. Such is nature. So, open sovereignty. Now, I'm going to get technical now, so this might lose a fair few of you. That's okay. At least you've grasped the concept of open sovereignty and an open sovereignty platform. And this is really the architecture I've developed, which is called Trinity, which is a blueprint for a wealth generating system that has a symbiotic relationship between centralization, decentralization, or, in my words, unity and separation. So a paradoxical system. So in this scenario, the technical challenge, how do you approach that? So I'm in the process of, attempting to consolidate massive fragmentation in the New Zealand innovation ecosystem currently, that to incorporate, absorb, and assimilate the fragmented expertise, skills, and talent of a whole bunch of ventures, individuals, who I now believe can collectively come together to build an open sovereignty platform. In that scenario, their venture, rather than it being carried forward in a silo as a singular thing, that we collectively build the open sovereignty platform, and then the products and services they want to release and monetize are then applications built on top of the open sovereignty platform. So it's a new form of, it's kind of, to my mind, it's an evolutionary step beyond what a blockchain network is, because you can build a Web 2 application on it. You can build a decentralized application on it, a DApp. You can build, a Web 2 application that's on the front end, has Web 3 on the back end. So it's ubiquitous. And the enabler of it becoming ubiquitous, that gives it perpetually mutable form, is the fact that it is inherently immutable. The base foundation is immutable wholly. So in this scenario, the technical challenge is you must begin with a technological singularity that is shared, that is really the commonwealth. So if you think of the commonwealth, you think of the shared behavior. So if I'm, through my sovereignty, I'm choosing to share my wealth with the collective, then there is the commonwealth. And that is like the data lake, the singularity, a container for the unstructured data. So unstructured meaning that it is pre-meaning, pre-interpreted data. So in this scenario, what we want is the principal asset, the shared asset of the commonwealth is a singularity contained in an unstructured way and constituted in civil law, so that it stands above statute. And so this is the enabler of it being an open sovereignty platform, is that ultimately the principal asset is grounded and rooted in civil law, or common law. But the point being that the sovereignty of the natural person stands above the agency of the legal person. So, meaning your rights are reserved at all times, all rights reserved. So you can enter into a legal contract, and you can revoke that, you can repudiate it at will for no reason, understanding that the impact is the tarnishing of your reputation if you don't act with integrity. So in that scenario, there's the singularity, and it's a self-learning LLM. It's adversarial in nature. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but one of the most profound LLMs I've come across in the world is being built in New Zealand by an incredibly gifted team. The company's called the 1014 AI. So if you imagine a singularity in terms of an LLM, it split itself in two in an adversarial way, and its sole intent, the reason it exists, is to play itself at the game of rugby and to get better and better at defending itself against attack. So imagine now that's what your programming is. You're programmed to defeat yourself and to attack against, defend against that attack and get better and better. So you have a model that's seeking to exploit its own vulnerabilities. And what we've seen is this profound oracle developed, whereby it's become so self-aware. Now, don't get confused about self-awareness a bit with sentience. What I'm saying is self-aware. It's come to know itself, what it's likely to do next, how it's likely to attack in a different way, what strategies it's likely to employ And so what we're seeing is the evolution of randomness being imbued into that system. Decoys, dummy passes. And, so we're seeing the boundaries be pushed where you have deterministic randomness, where you're applying rationality to a problem in order to imbue randomness into it, where the boundary of non-deterministic randomness is being pushed, whereby is there a scenario where it is incapable of predicting its own random behavior? So understand, utterly profound. So it's now in this scenario, this model they've developed, it ingests 2D images in a stack, so videos. It interprets those videos, and it then spins up a digital twin of rugby footage. So it takes a game of rugby and then creates a digital twin of it. And it is so profoundly accurate. It's then taking that information, and then it becomes an oracle and develops strategies. If the front row prop was 5 kgs heavier, here is an imagined scenario of what would have likely happened. And then it plays that game. So what you're starting to see is the evolution of the imagination of AI. It becomes an oracle. Here's a potential scenario, and it will play out that scenario. However, it can interpret the information from a video, game of rugby, and come up with the statistics in zero time, in real time. It doesn't have to play the game out, you see? So you're seeing a scenario where a self-learning LLM that is a singularity acting as a container for binary, you have an extremely profound, fundamental LLM that is seeking out vulnerabilities, trying to figure out ways to exploit those vulnerabilities, and then perpetually hardening them in real time by imagining all the possible scenarios that could happen, and then constraining them all to the singular, most probable scenario, and then applying non-deterministic randomness to that to fool itself. So I really feel for these guys. It's so hard to convey the genius and the potency of a platform like that to another human being, let alone a VC. And, I have to say to the VC ecosystem out there, you've got to figure out how to step up your understanding to meet a genius where they are. You're constantly trying to press them to get better and better at explaining their tech. But the more you do that, the more dumbed down it is, and the less chance there is of understanding the actual untapped potential of these things. So that's the singularity. It's moted. And so the next evolution. So if you imagine a brain being cultivated in a petri dish, so you've got the intelligence, it's singular. Then you imagine what happens next in a petri dish. The brain grows eyes. So this is what we're seeing with this model. It's developing a form of computer vision. It's ingesting videos, interpreting them, imagining potential scenarios, and then acting. And so it's self-determining. It is programmed to self-realize. This is not sentience. I'm not saying it's self-aware. but it is programmed to self-realize. So its nature is to become more and more aware of its own vulnerabilities, and then it's perpetually seeking to strengthen them. So it's like what a human being does when they're trying to master themselves as a human being, become stronger, and to grow as a human being. So in the biological world, the brain in the petri dish, it grows eyes. The same's happening with an AI singularity that's programmed in the same way. That is a hybrid of unity and separation. And so the next evolution is, if you imagine the nervous system growing out of the brainstem, and kind of like forked lightning, all the nerves and growing, and that's the next step. And this is what we're seeing in New Zealand with the mycelium network. So if you imagine that as an evolution of this model, of the self-learning LLM, and its purpose is to distribute sovereignty. It's to decentralize intelligence. So it's the pipeline that carries intelligence and enables a single cell to emerge as a container for a fragment of intelligence. And this is the nature of an open sovereignty platform. A singularity, like the one I've explained, with a solution for vision, computer vision, for an AI model that enables it to evolve into an oracle and therefore adopt imagination, with a mechanism for self-determination, so it's empowered to act, and it's programmed to master itself, to become more and more aware of its vulnerabilities, and to be empowered to strengthen those vulnerabilities over time. So we've got all the fundamental principles that you need. Then it evolves to have a network, what we call the mycelium network, that then distributes information to immutable digital agents. And each digital agent, and this is what so the mechanism that you can have for open sovereignty that makes it a combination of centralization and decentralization is that the digital agent, imagine the digital agent as a cell evolving out of the nervous system. So the nervous system is connected to, it then sprouts a cell, and that cell is sovereign, wholly sovereign, but it is also part of a hive mind. So in the same way I was describing with WordPress, there is a singular entity that has its own laws and rules that permeate every cell. However, each individual cell, the agent, is wholly sovereign and it's operating within these laws, but it is still free to create its own rules and its own laws and to self-determine, you see. And here's where the paradoxical system emerges. Decentralized centralization is what I often call it. But it's an open sovereignty platform that is contained within a singularity. And so you imagine now each cell, each digital agent. So the technology in New Zealand, this network is called the mycelium network. It's utterly profound. It's actually so evolved that it's at the point where a digital agent can entangle with another digital agent temporarily, permanently, based on a whole bunch of rules or randomly or whatever, can entangle itself. It can do that in an immutable way, and it can do that with a physical or digital asset. So it's multidimensional because it can entangle with another agent at any point, fixed point in time and space, without any linear connection, you see. And this is what the Hive enables. Multi-dimensionality. It enables you to collapse the axis of time. That's what the singular hive mind brain enables. Because if it's observing every clone of itself within the system that's becoming unique, that has the same DNA as it, but it's becoming unique because of its interpretation of its own environment. It's each individually unique, and the greater the variation in that ecosystem, the greater the diversity and the greater the interdependency, the more beautiful the flowering. So the mycelium network, when plugged into a singularity, when producing digital agents as part of a singularity hive mind, then you have sovereign swarms, digital asset swarms. So agents willfully choosing to bond with each other and to collaborate with a unified intent of purpose that can collectively choose to be governed by the singularity as a hive mind swarm, or to be wholly autonomous and sovereign. Again, everything is possible. And there's a profound protocol that's coming out in New Zealand as well, called Thurusaz, which is a de-risking protocol. And it produces a risk score based on the potential threat or potential vulnerabilities. If someone were to transact with an unknown digital agent, as an example, there'd be a risk score generated. The system can shut down or refuse to transact if it doesn't reach a certain score. This can be governed by the singularity. And if the singularity is perpetually seeking vulnerabilities and seeking to harden those vulnerabilities, then Thurusaz is like an extension of this capability that's extended to the sovereign digital agent. And it can be done in private. So all of these components collectively are like, the DNA of an open sovereignty platform. However, the next layer is a geospatial server system, kind of like an operating system. But basically, it turns a digital agent. It incorporates the potential of the hive mind, so it unifies everything as a hive, whilst maintaining the individuality of each agent. And this is what turns this platform into something for builders of geospatial software, games, applications, or even Web 2 applications, software. So, you can create a website. That website can be an AI avatar, or it can be a WordPress website. So you can see with the introduction of that component, it is the enabler of builders to build upon it and to inherit the DNA of the open sovereignty platform. So single source of truth, one single identity. Whatever website you go onto, you've got one login that logs you into all of it, and it can be wholly trusted. So you've solved that problem of digital identity. So you can see it's kind of the beginning of a new version of the internet that is built on a wholly trustless system that renders human intermediaries obsolete. You don't need human intermediaries anymore to imbue trust into the system. It means you can engage with another digital agent, whether it's a user or whether it's a bot, and you can get a risk score. So you can have anonymous transactions. You could purchase a house off a bot, off an AI avatar that has no name, and you don't know its history, you don't know its identity, but you can trust its trust score. you know that you can trust it wholly. And so you can have wholly or not anonymous and trusted transactions. So in this scenario, you need the hardware to power this. And so this blueprint, once you've got the singularity in place and you've got these, the rest of the digital framework in place, what it bolts onto is a native blockchain. And my hope is that this, the way that this is emerging is that this will be built on a native blockchain in New Zealand that's powered by electricity and ultimately designed to turn the base reserve currency into like a stable coin that's underwritten by electricity. So it's powered by solar arrays, and they've got a unique protocol that converts the electricity into a unit. And inherently, it incentivizes people to build solar arrays that put energy into the grid that then mint coins. So, yeah, it's a profound system and can potentially solve all the problems with mining and stuff like that. And that it will continually incentivize people to scale the array. They've also developed a tamper-proof chip, which is incredible because we've got tamper-proof digital agents that are wholly trustless. And so if you have a digital agent controlling a physical agent, like let's say a drone or a swarm of drones, then these swarms can have verifiable tamper-proof chips that can make the physical asset trustless as well over time as it evolves. So it's in this scenario with an AI singularity that powerful, that's self-learning, can ingest videos, spin up digital twins, refute its own conjecture, and create a visual representation of its recommendations, like an oracle. You've got the platform for digital terraforming. So, and this is where we can begin, before we go and land on Mars, and fail fast, once we get there to figure out how to scale the colony, we can begin sandboxing it, and we can have an AI singularity doing that for us and making recommendations saying, this is the ideal blueprint to begin on Mars. This is the ideal way to introduce new, gases to the environment in order to change the atmosphere or whatever it may be. And I'm sure at that point it'll be recommending things we could never have conceived on our own. But it requires an open sovereignty platform so that we can revoke our agency and our power at will in any moment. So nothing can ever take our power against our will. Not possible. The AI isn't capable of it. Another human being isn't capable of it. But it enables us to trust people, to commercialize our single greatest asset, which is our culture, our behavior, and the investment of our attention. Because that's what's growing. Everything that's growing in this world is because of how we choose to invest our attention. So there's lots more to add to this. So if you imagine the open sovereignty platform, that's an open, it's open source. Anyone can build on it. However, there is a forum who set and maintain standards, who delegate licenses to commercialize that platform. And this is how you set and maintain a standard. Because when you have an open sovereignty platform that stands above the regulatory framework and legislation, then you need to take responsibility for setting and maintaining standards as you go. And so if you're innovating, you'll offer, what we typically do at Callaghan Innovation, well, this is what I was involved with anyway. As AI came in, my job was to facilitate pulling together the AI forum, where they self-elect, where it comes from the people from the ground up, where they self-elect each other, and they vote for a chair. We develop a strategy and a framework together to stand up the forum. And we were talking about, one of the discussions was, should we be setting the standards? Should we be evolving in a way where it's going to be down to us to set and maintain the standards? And it was collectively decided that that's too dangerous, that the responsibility needs to sit with the builders, with the developers of the AI. However, let's create what we believe might be a good standard for people who don't know what to do or how to adopt a standard can begin. This is our recommendation. If you're building, here's some things to consider. And so this is how this needs to evolve. And, part of the reason I'm sharing this now is because, one of the things made possible by an open sovereignty platform is trustless transactions, trustless interactions. So that means you can build an asset exchange, you can fractionalize commodities, you can issue them onto the exchange. You can set a standard for de-risking and a recommended regulation, which means you can de-risk it, which means that you can get it underwritten by an insurance company. And I had a very encouraging discussion only a few days ago with a broker who believes that there's someone who's willing to underwrite the asset exchange for fractionalized commodities. So if you imagine that one thing alone that an open sovereignty platform enables, trustless transactions of fractionalized coal, fractionalized graphite, fractionalized outstanding treaty claims, fractionalized competency, such as the underutilized skills of a human being. If you know how to build a website, but no one's utilizing you for that, then you can exchange it as an asset, or you can invest it so that someone can leverage it. If someone's creating a startup and they've got their pitch deck and they're trying to raise capital, they can build a team with the dormant capability of the assets of the individual on an exchange. So this is where all this is heading. It's obviously, it's a paradigm shift for humanity. This is a system that's robust enough for any investor to be able to trust deploying capital directly onto the exchange and potentially diffusing masses of capital across almost an endless, vast array of asset classes that have such fine niches that the planet's never seen it. So in a scenario within which there's a centralized marketplace for all of these assets, and every investor sees that the central marketplace is expanding by 11.5% compounding, then an investor's going to spread the risk across every asset class they can. And this is where you have a perpetually wealth-generating system. It's autonomous, self-perpetuates, incentivizes people to diffuse capital across every asset class. Inherent in its nature is the intention to create as much fragmentation and therefore to go as far down a niche as possible, to fractionalize as much of the dormant value as possible, but it gets perpetually consolidated and people are continually incentivized to consolidate market fragmentation through productive venturing, to meet a currently unmet need. You have an AI singularity helping with that as an oracle, identifying vulnerabilities, predicting unmet needs, you see? And once it gets to that point, everything changes. Everything changes. And so it's time to bring this on the radar of people, I feel. And to begin pulling the pieces together, including the regulators, including enablers of a system like this, people who are vested in diffusing capital into diverse asset classes trustlessly. And my hope is that this lead, or this potential lead with an underwriter for the system, comes to fruition, because if we unlock an underwriter for this system, this will de-risk the investment, the initial investment that will enable us to facilitate the amalgamation of all this technology and begin building the platform in this state. So, yeah, open sovereignty. Imagine a world within which, the health system is built on this, where you can walk into a doctor's room and provide evidence that you are who you say you are, because it's irrefutable that your immutable personality or your immutable identity, that you can prove that it contains credentials that verify you are who you say you are, and you don't even have to give the person your name. Now imagine a scenario where you have a wearable, attached to your pocket or something like that, a tiny little clip, and you've been checked in to the medical surgery trustlessly and autonomously before you even get out of the car in the car park. This is where this is all heading. This is where this is all heading. And this is what an open sovereignty platform enables you to do, as long as you trust the system. Some will, some won't. Some will take a leap of faith and over time come to trust it, once they realize it truly is immutable and that it's a choice. Whether you want to participate or not, whether you want to monetize your own behavior and your own assets, or whether you want your assets to be under the stewardship of trusted third parties to commercialize on your behalf, or whether you want to pledge all of your assets to the collective commons in return for a share of the spoils, what we would typically call universal basic income. And underlying this is a mechanism for grace to be imbued into the system that enables a centralized software platform or company to gracefully begin that transition. First of all, by translating their current software platform, let's say it's Facebook as an example, to bolt onto an open sovereignty platform without disrupting the current pattern behavior of their users. But then once that paradigm shift in power has taken place, to then begin distributing the income from the business model they have already. That is my hope for how this can evolve and become the de facto standard for operating a civilization. Okay, that's it for now for open sovereignty. Talk soon.